The 99th attempt ended the same way the others had, quietly. Without noise, without ceremony, the effort faded into the air like breath on a cold evening. And once again, the road seemed to close, just a little more in front of him. He stood there for a while, saying nothing. Failure has a strange silence to it. It does not shout. It does not argue. It simply settles around a person, like dust that slowly covers everything that once felt bright. They had already begun to speak about him long ago. Not loudly, perhaps. Not always in cruel ways. But the tone had changed. The small glances, the quiet shakes of the head, the soft sighs that people give when they believe a story has already reached its ending. 99 times. It is a number that begins to sound heavy when spoken slowly. Most people would have stopped long before that. Most people would have taken the quiet signs as an answer. A closed door is a closed door after all. And when it closes again and again, the mind begins to ask uncomfortable questions. Maybe they are right. Maybe this path was never meant to open. Maybe effort has its limits. These thoughts move quietly through the heart when no one is watching. They arrive gently, but they sit heavily. And so he walked away from that 99th attempt with the same slow steps he had taken many times before. Not angry, not loud, just tired in a way that only repeated disappointment can create. But something inside him was still awake. It was not excitement. It was not hope in the bright, cheerful way people often describe it. No, it was something quieter than hope. A small feeling that refused to completely disappear. Have you ever noticed that feeling? That strange, quiet place inside a person where something continues to breathe, even when the outside world has already decided the ending. It does not argue with anyone. It does not try to prove anything. It simply remains silent, patient, and almost invisible. They had already written his story in their minds. To them, the meaning was clear. 99 failures could only mean one thing. The conclusion seemed obvious. People often like conclusions. They make life easier to understand. But conclusions can arrive too early. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the only one who has not yet agreed with the ending. He did not try to defend himself. He did not explain the long hours that no one had seen. He did not remind them of the small lessons hidden inside each mistake. There was no speech waiting on his lips. Only silence. Only silence. And in that silence, something interesting began to happen. Instead of pushing against the weight of failure, he simply allowed it to sit beside him for a moment. He looked at it the way a traveler might look at a long road stretching into darkness. Was this truly the end? Or was it simply another bend in the path? No one else stayed long enough to wonder. They moved on with their certainty. It is easier that way. It is easier to close the story of another person than to sit with uncertainty. But he remained there for a while, quietly standing in the space between what had happened and what might still be possible. 99 attempts. Each one carried a small piece of effort, a small piece of patience, a small piece of belief that had not yet fully broken. Perhaps that belief was fragile now. Perhaps it had grown thin from being stretched so many times. But it was not gone. And sometimes, that is the most mysterious thing about the human heart. It can stand in the shadow of 99 failures and still refuse to fully close the door. After many attempts, something else began to change. Not outside. Outside, the world looked almost the same. The road was still long. The door still seemed closed. The quiet glances from others had not disappeared, but inside, something felt different. At first, he could not explain it. It was only a feeling, a strange weight that settled in his chest whenever their voices reached him. They did not always speak directly to him. Sometimes the words floated nearby, carried softly in conversations that were not meant for his ears, yet somehow always found their way there. 99 times, they would say. The number returned again and again, like a quiet echo, and slowly a question began to form in the silence of his thoughts. Was his silence making them stronger, or was it protecting something deeper inside him? There are moments in life when a person feels the pull to answer every doubt, to explain every mistake, to rise quickly and defend their path. The urge can be powerful. After all, when people misunderstand you, the heart naturally wishes to be seen clearly. It wishes to say, "You do not know the full story." But something held him back. Not fear, not weakness. Just a quiet awareness that speaking too soon can sometimes scatter the very strength a person is trying to gather. So he remained quiet. At first, that silence felt uncomfortable. Almost like standing alone in a wide, empty field while others watched from a distance. Their thoughts moved around him like the wind, some gentle, some sharp, and still he said nothing. They began to believe the silence meant surrender. It is easy for people to think that way. When someone does not argue, when someone does not defend themselves, many assume the person has already accepted defeat. But silence does not always mean defeat. Sometimes silence is simply a space where a person listens more carefully, not to others, but to the quiet voice within. He began to notice things he had not noticed before. In the quiet moments after another failure, he would sit with his thoughts instead of pushing them away. He would look closely at each mistake, not with anger, but with patience. What had truly gone wrong? Where had the effort lost its balance? Where had he rushed when he should have waited? These questions moved slowly through his mind, like lanterns being lit, one by one in a dark room, and something surprising happened. The failures began to look different. They no longer appeared as heavy stones blocking his path. Instead, they started to resemble quiet teachers standing along the road. Not kind teachers, not gentle ones, but honest ones. Each mistake carried a small truth hidden inside it, a detail that had once been missed. A step that could be taken more carefully next time. Perhaps this was the strange gift hidden inside silence. When a person stops reacting to every voice around them, they begin to hear something deeper. They begin to hear themselves. But this kind of listening requires patience. It requires the courage to sit with discomfort, without rushing to escape it. Many people cannot stay in that space for long. The noise of the world calls them back too quickly. The pressure to prove themselves becomes too loud, yet he stayed there, quietly. Day after day, the outside voices slowly lost their sharpness. Not because the voices disappeared, but because his attention began to move somewhere else. He was no longer standing in the center of their judgments. Instead, he was walking deeper into his own understanding. And in that quiet place, something new was slowly beginning to form. Not pride, not stubbornness. Something steadier, a calm discipline that grows only in silence, where no applause exists and no defense is needed. One quiet day, something changed in a way no one else could see. There was no sudden moment, no loud realization, no bright sign appearing in front of him. The change arrived gently, the way morning light slowly enters a dark room. He was sitting alone, as he often did after another long day of effort. The air around him was still. Nothing in the world seemed different from the many days that had come before. And yet his thoughts felt calmer. For a long time, he had carried the weight of proving something. Proving that the effort was not foolish. Proving that the path was not empty. Proving that the many failures did not mean the end. But as he sat there in silence, he began to notice something strange. That weight was no longer pressing so hard on his chest. When had it become lighter? He searched his thoughts for the answer, but there was no clear moment he could point to. The change had happened quietly, step by step, inside the long silence he had allowed himself. And slowly, he understood something that had once been hidden. The world had never required him to answer every doubt. It was he who had once believed that he must. They had spoken, they had judged, they had counted the failures carefully, as if numbers could measure the full depth of a person's journey. But their voices had only been echoes outside him. The real struggle had always been inside. It had been the restless urge to react, the feeling that every doubt needed a reply, the belief that silence might erase his worth. Now that urge felt distant, almost unnecessary. He looked back at the 99 attempts one by one, like stepping stones scattered across a long river. Each stone had once felt like a place where the journey had nearly ended, but none of them had truly been the end. They had simply been moments where he had paused, learned, and quietly continued. A soft question rose in his mind. What if silence had not been weakness at all? What if it had been protection? Protection for the small, fragile strength that was still growing inside him. If he had spent all his energy arguing with them, explaining himself, defending every mistake, would that strength have survived? Perhaps not. Words can scatter a person's focus the way strong wind scatters dry leaves. One moment of reaction can pull the heart far away from its true direction. But silence had kept him close to his path. It had given him space to see clearly. He began to notice another truth as well. The people who had judged him were not enemies. They were simply observers standing at the edge of a road they themselves had not walked. From where they stood, the road looked simple, straight, easy to measure. But the person walking the road always sees things others cannot. The uneven ground, the hidden turns, the quiet lessons that appear only after long patience. And suddenly he no longer felt the need to change their understanding. Let them believe what they wished. Let them count the failures. Their counting die. Die, not define the meaning of the journey. In that quiet realization, something steady settled inside him. A calm strength that did not ask for approval. A patience that did not hurry to prove itself. He sat there for a long time, feeling the stillness around him. The night was quiet. His thoughts were quiet. And within that silence, a simple idea began to form. Perhaps the next attempt did not need to carry the heavy burden of the past. Perhaps it could simply be another step, taken with the quiet discipline he had been building all along. Not louder, not desperate, just steady. The world outside would probably look the same tomorrow. The same voices might still exist. The same doubts might still move through the air. But something inside him had already shifted. And sometimes that quiet shift is the only change a person truly needs before taking the next step. The next attempt arrived quietly, just like the ones before it. There was no special morning, no sudden feeling that the world had changed. The sky looked the same. The path in front of him looked no different from the many times he had walked it before. And yet something inside him had become calmer. He did not carry the same restless thoughts that once followed him. The old questions had softened. The urge to prove something to the world had slowly faded into the background. He simply walked forward. One step, then another. It is strange how effort feels different when it is no longer pushed by desperation. The hands move more gently. The mind becomes clearer. Even the smallest details begin to reveal themselves in ways they never did before. For a long time, each attempt had carried a quiet pressure, the feeling that this must finally be the moment everything changes. But this time, the moment felt lighter, not careless, but peaceful. He no longer measured himself by the voices that had once followed him. Their counting of failures had lost its weight. Their quiet judgments no longer stood in the center of his thoughts. They were simply part of the background now, like distant echoes carried away by the wind. And so he worked, patiently, carefully. The lessons gathered from many silent days were still with him. The small mistakes that once repeated themselves had been slowly understood. Each step now carried the quiet discipline built through every moment of restraint. There was no hurry in his movements. Sometimes he paused. Sometimes he paused. Sometimes he simply observed. A person who has learned through long silence begins to notice things that rushing eyes often miss. The small shift in direction. The place where patience is needed instead of force. The moment when waiting becomes wiser than pushing. These quiet understandings had been growing inside him during all those days when the world believed nothing was happening. Perhaps that is the hidden truth of many journeys. The most important changes often happen where no one is watching. Time moved gently forward. The effort continued, And then, almost without warning, something different appeared. Not a loud victory, not a sudden celebration, just a small opening where there had once only been resistance. He noticed it slowly, the way a traveler notices the first break in a long wall. For a moment, he stood still, studying the space in front of him. Was it real? Or was it another moment that would soon close again? His heart remained calm. The silence he had practiced for so long protected him from rushing too quickly into excitement. Instead of running forward, he simply took another careful step, then another. The opening did not close. The effort moved through it quietly, almost gently, as if the path had finally decided to allow his steps to pass. And in that quiet moment, the attempt completed itself. No loud sound marked the change. No voice announced that the long struggle had ended. Yet something undeniable had shifted. The same hands that had tried 99 times before had now found their way through. He stood there for a while, breathing slowly, looking at the path that had once seemed impossible to cross. It felt almost ordinary. Perhaps that is the quiet nature of real change. It does not always arrive with noise or excitement. Sometimes it simply appears after long patience, as if it had been waiting for the right kind of effort. The kind that no longer demands quick rewards. The voices of others would eventually notice. They would count again, perhaps with surprise this time. But those voices mattered less now, because the most important change had already happened long before this moment. It had happened in silence, in the long discipline of not reacting, in the quiet strength that had grown each time he chose patience over frustration. The 100th attempt had opened the door, but the person who stepped through it had already been quietly transformed by the 99 that came before.